where we can be secure in times where the outer world and the activities around us, right here in our own city, can challenge our faith. Last week, I began a 3-week series I entitled Confident Living, and we sang that great unity song. And by that title, I mean a strength of mind and heart that gets us through. It's what our world requires of us today. So each week, we're remembering a visionary leader of the 20th century that has inspired me, our Unity family, and far beyond. Last week, we began by recognizing Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a moral witness for our times, one who stood and held up truth for our country, and even beyond, for the world to see. Of faith, I chose to call it his dream. I have a dream. I have a light in my mind and my heart that is my solace, my rock, my strength, my hope. Today, I wish to continue with our founders in Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and I put words in their mouth for my title. I have a prayer, and I follow it. And next week, I'll share great inspiration to me, the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner. And that title, I have a vision, and I live it. I have a vision, and I live it. But today we began with the Fillmores, and they held so tightly to their prayer and faith that they found in their own lives through healing. They held to that prayer of faith, and it launched a movement that eventually encircled the globe and was a balm, an aid to millions and millions of people. Today, as we consider Charles and Myrtle, first, I want to call forth Charles' immediate inspiration. What was it? It was his wife, Myrtle, the mother of Unity. She initiated the work for both of them. When she became so physically ill that she asked Charles' mother to please watch after the family. She said, I'm going to have to go into intense inner work if I'm going to stay on this planet, as she said it. And so she spent 2 years in meditation. She said, truly, I held a prayer every hour of that entire period, affirming the truth of the God life, the impulse of spirit within her. Well, Charles couldn't help but notice the change in her physical vitality, her strength. She was able to take up duties of the family again, so far as I always like to point out, in 1889, at the age of 45, and after recovering from the effects of tuberculosis, she gave birth to their third son, Royal Fillmore. So she must have discovered a physical healing and a power. Myrtle would go on later when Unity students kept asking, Mrs. Fillmore, please, 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 tell us what was the secret of your healing. And of course, we know her famous motto, the idea that caught her attention when she heard a Dr. Weeks visiting Kansas City from Chicago and giving a truth lecture, a lecture on spirituality, as we would say now. And she caught this idea from him. I am a child of God. Therefore, I do not inherit sickness. She realized she was a divine creation, as we all are, and God did not create her for illness. He created her for life. And as she worked with that idea, her physical life was transformed. But she went on to write down her story for Unity students in the years to come and said, I realized physical healing, but then I had a new vision. Physical healing wasn't enough. I needed to develop all of the divine gifts that God gave me. I needed to progress on my spiritual development. And after years of exploring and holding the truth of all the possibilities that God had given her and given everyone, she said, now I've got another work that I need to turn my attention. And that is helping others on their path. And so even though the doctors had given up on her, she would live and work another 40 years to inspire those interested in the unity idea and writing thousands upon thousands of individual letters of people that turned to her for assistance. They don't even know how many she wrote, but they know it numbered in the thousands, many of them many, many pages that she wrote to one person, such as a Claire in Bloomington, Minnesota, anyone that would ask. So Charles was amazed by this process, and he decided he wanted to seek out this potential higher power. And so he studied everything that came into his awareness, a variety of the world's faiths, from the ancient world up to his own time. He studied truths from the Far East, India, the Hermetic philosophy that led to the development of 19th century secret societies, as they were called then. He especially studied the Theosophical school. And to this day, the Theosophical Society International holds their same motto: there is nothing higher than truth. There is nothing higher than truth. Charles could get on board with that. But in all of his many studies, he said, I quote, I noticed, however, that all the teachers and writers talked a great deal about the omnipresent, all-knowing God, who is spirit and accessible to everyone. I said to myself, in this confusion, in this babble, I will go to headquarters. If I am spirit, and this God they talk about so much is spirit, we can somehow communicate, or the whole religion thing is a fraud. And so he devoted himself, no matter what was going on in his life, in his world, to spending some time every day in the silence. He said, for a long time, I was just in the silence, in the nothing. Nothing was happening. But he wouldn't give up, and he made his pledge to Spirit, to God, that he'd reserve time each day to be still, to turn his attention inward instead of on the outer world. And eventually he said, I began to feel an impulse in my body, a certain electrical quality, he called it. And Charles, you see, desired his own physical healing. As a child of 11 in a skating accident, his hip had been broken, it didn't heal properly, and it developed a tumor in it. As a result, in those years of teenage growth, his leg didn't grow. And so he had to wear an extension on his shoe and an iron brace in order to walk. But he never gave up on the potential of his healing. And finally, when he was in his 80s, he was able to remove the iron brace and walk without it. And it wasn't too many years later that he made the enthusiastic proclamation that Don read to us from the Daily Word. I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me. I've often heard that quoted, and they leave off the by me. The things that ought to be done. We're always talking about what ought to be, but Charles knew what ought to be done by him. What was his to do was his work. What is yours to do is your work. Well, they initiated in 1889 Modern Thought, the first publication of Unity in April of that year, and they continued using publishing as a way to get these ideas out to the world. How would Charles do it if he were here today? Well, I'm sure he'd be very involved with social media, technology, any way to get a positive, affirmative idea that changes lives out into the world. He would, in a few years, start the first, officially the first, religious owned and operated radio station. WOQ began in 1922, broadcasting what Unity understood as their message of truth for the world. And that broadcast for many years. But it all gets back to that essential commitment he made to Spirit, a daily practice of stopping outer activity, turning attention to the presence of God, of course within everybody, but for his practice, it was turning to the presence within him, as your practice would be turning to the presence within you. He made bold claims, published them, broadcast them through the radio. Words such as, I quote, all manifestation of life originates in the silence. The thoughts that rise up in you come to the surface in deed and action. Are they not from the silence? Do you take a step or lift a hand that has not its motive from the depths of the mighty sea of throbbing life within your own being? He was quite a wordsmith. Then why look to the external for that which comes only from the silence within? Charles went on in his first book, Christian Healing of 1909, to teach the practice that we've had through all these years in Unity of affirmation and denial. How did that work? Charles says denial always comes first. And he gave the image, if you had a wound on your body, wouldn't you do the cleansing work first to wash that wound before you bandaged it? In other words, when we have a challenge, look to any mistaken ideas, what Charles called error consciousness, any untruth we were holding about ourselves or a situation in our life, to let that go first and then affirm a greater idea, a greater truth. Well, in my 40 years of experience in unity, I was taught about the power of affirmative prayer, affirming words, speaking the truth. But I heard less and less and less talk of the process of denial. Over time, unity's idea of denial would even become connected with psychological desire or psychological denial, to ignore something. I'm not mad, Margaret. And you know that joke I often like to tell? The two unity ministers in hell saying, it's not hot and we're not here. Denial is not about ignoring your circumstances. It's about ignoring any less than idea about you. Another great teacher in unity, Imelda Octavia Shanklin, that was the head of publishing in the 1920s. She would write, do the best you can in any struggle or trial you're going through to affirm something positive, something possible for your life. Myrtle would write to the woman that wrote to Myrtle saying, I don't get it. I use all the unity practices of affirmation. I've not been well for a while, and every day I say, I don't have the flu, I don't have the flu, I don't have the flu. And Myrtle said, dear, unity is not asking you to deny circumstances in your life. We're asking you to deny that that flu is the eternal, everlasting truth of you. It's something you're going through. You will pass beyond it. Affirmation is about affirming. I'm God's creation, created with wisdom and love, compassion for myself and others, creativity to bring good things into this world. That's the affirmation. It's not, Margaret, I'm not mad. I'm not sick. I don't have an empty wallet. It's not ignoring. It's releasing any less than truth about yourself. Well, I was just born a loser. You need to deny that. A friend of mine recently called from another state and said, oh, I just hate people. And I said, that is not true. I've known you all these years, and you're an unusually generous person who cares a great deal. And he was confusing, in my opinion, his frustration with people that weren't doing their best or they were being harmful to others. And that frustration he would translate in his mind to, I hate people. No, you hate how people are acting. You don't hate the people. Charles also liked good common sense, like this wisdom that he read in his own time. To know God without being God-like is like trying to swim without entering the water. Charles would claim, you cannot think of God in prayer, in your silent time, without the divine qualities of God bringing you blessing. That's one of my favorite statements of faith, that any time one enters into prayer and affirms the goodness and power and presence of God, you will somehow be blessed, be healed, be encouraged, be comforted. Charles, of course, for his greatest inspiration, turned to the words of Jesus that we have recorded in the Gospels. And one might think, or it's easy to slip into Unity's affirmative practices, to think that you're making everything in your life. Another woman wrote to Myrtle at one time, and she said, I'm trying to do everything I can according to the Unity way, but my life still is not working. And Myrtle said something that didn't sound quite like unity, but it makes us think. She wrote to this woman and said, your world, my dear, is not entirely of your own making. What? We sing songs, I make my own world wherever I am. And Myrtle's saying, your world is not entirely of your own making. She reminded the woman that she lived among humanity in a world that was not yet perfected, in human consciousness that was not yet holistic and perfect. And therefore she had to cleanse her mind through denials to not take on everything the world was telling her. So Charles did not claim egotistically that he was accomplishing all the work. He turned to the truths of Jesus or the truths of Paul from Colossians. He considered this the most important idea in all of Scripture. What was that? In his deathbed, he would ask those that were allowed to visit him, what is the most important Scripture? And people would say, oh, Mr. Fillmore, I don't know. What do you think? And he'd say, well, of course, the mystery which was hidden for ages and generations, but has now been revealed to God's people. God chose to make known to them how great are the riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you and among you is the hope of glory, of realizing your oneness with God, with the source of all. So I want to take this opportunity for us to practice the silence. Some people avoid a time of silence because they say, oh, I don't have time in my busy life to sit still and do nothing. Sitting still, being open and receptive to Spirit's presence and power and wisdom and love and possibility is actually the greatest thing you can do in your day. and in our days that we're facing now. The world tells us how we should feel, how we should be alarmed, what we should do. But only when you spend some time with expectancy in the silence can you get your most powerful impulse of what yours is to do. So I invite you to join me in turning within. And it does not have to be a mysterious, difficult, lengthy process. All it requires is your willingness to turn your attention away from outer things, to also turn your attention away from that which is disturbing you, and turn to the truth of who and what you are. Charles and Myrtle taught this prayer for about 60 years until they left this physical world. And it's this centering idea. I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the whole spirit of wisdom, love, life. I acknowledge your presence and power with me always. In your divine wisdom, erase my mortal limitations, my mortal ideas and beliefs. Any idea I hold of myself or the world that is less than, not good enough. And through your spirit of love, the substance that creates all things, bring into manifestation my world according to your perfect law, your principle of truth. And so we rest for a moment in the silence. Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on me. Melt me, mold me, fill me, use me. Help me to behold your greater vision, your divine hope for this world. And then stir me inside with a zeal so I can step forth with a mighty faith and do what ought to be done by me. My work, my compassion. Fill me with your radiance, your fire, that I can continually be a beneficial presence in my community and my world. I will give you my time. I will give you my attention so that you can empower me this very hour. And I invite you to allow your attention to return to the sanctuary in which you're seated with friends. Friends that see the best in you. And know that this was just a practice. Like Myrtle's healing experience, I led up a prayer that as I turned my attention to a higher reality every hour of the day. We may not be ready yet for silence in every hour as Myrtle practiced, but we can begin. We can take one step each day for silence, to allow the presence to inspire us so that our outer actions in the world are helpful, comforting to ourselves and to others, that we can make a difference in our world. But as Charles claimed and discovered in his own life, it all begins in the silence. Do you have a little time for silence in your life? If you already practice a time of prayer and meditation, can you give it a little more time in your life? It's your choice. I don't have your answer, but you do. And I have faith in your answer, in your way. And so it is.